Well, thank you for all coming. This is quite a group to speak to, and I really feel quite flattered that you all came to hear speak about this tonight and to show you some of the things that have happened in the past. Tonight, before I start, the videotaping of the program is being done by the students at the high school. So this is going to be part of their record too, so I better get it right tonight. One of the things I thought we would get the audience involved, and the first thing is I wanted to ask some questions. First, I wanted to ask how many have heard Granite talks before? Okay. And how many people have had relatives involved in the granite industry? Wonderful. And how many have never heard of Westerly Granite at all? Well, I got a couple. Those are the ones I can really work on, you know. I thought we would, and we're going to do some things that's unusual. We're going to do 3 parts that we've never done before in the Granite presentation. One is we're going to talk about a brief history. Then we're going to talk about people, which is the big thing we've never done before, and the most dangerous, because we're going to leave out somebody. But please don't feel bad about that, because we can't include all of them, because there were hundreds of these people. So we're going to talk about some up front, and then we'll hear from you if you have some people you would like to talk about. And then we're going to look at some things, some historic films, slides of the industry and the products that they did. And there'll be some people involved too. So we'll carry on right away. I would just like to say the use of granite in Westerly was done long before Orlando Smith found the outcropping of granite on Rhodes Hill, which was just to the south of the water tower as we know it, Tower Street, the water, and we'll see pictures of this a little later. The examples of that was the stone mill on Main Street, which was built in 1814. It was all stone, all granite. It was quarried here somewhere, either from boulders or ledge or somewhere. It was a crude building, but it was very substantial, several stories high. I'm sure some of you remember it. But it's been torn down for some years now. It was located on Main Street about where the Mobil gas station is now, right alongside of the river. The other great building that was built early was the Washington Bank. And my father writes that the walls of the building were very coarse granites, very heavy, coarse in texture, and they were big, bulky pieces, but they were cut granite and laid up very carefully. The front of it, he speaks of the platform of the steps being superb granite, being very, very sound and very clear. And this was torn down to make room for the present Washington Trust Company that we have today. The entrance of the old bank is about where the entrance is today when we go into the Washington Trust Company today. This had, on the platform, it supported 4 wooden columns, and all of the upper structure of the building was wood. When it was torn down, it was purchased and went to Taunton, Connecticut, Massachusetts. Other early buildings was the building in Bradford. I think this was in the 1860s, Dwight, something like that? The mill in Bradford, the stone mill? Yeah, 1863. 61. So that came after what we were doing here, and also the one in Potter Hill. So to carry on, the discovery of the granite up on Rhodes Hill by Orlando was really a lucky thing, because he came here to build foundations and crude granite structures relative to buildings and crosswalks and curbing, very crude kind of product. And he lived on Mechanic Street. And he would go and quarry a stone near a house that was being built to put up the underpinning and so forth. And he eventually ran out of this kind of material because of the density of the buildings, and we had to go further out of town and found this outcropping on the Babcock farm. And this was, and he found it to be substantial and of good material. And easy to work, that's very important. And so he had a 2-year option to buy it, which he exercised, And he and his wife moved up to what we call the Babcock House today in 1846. And this is really the kind of date we talk about the industry beginning as it grew from this point on. And so with him at that time was a man named Burdick, William Burdick, who was a stonecutter in his own right and had served his apprenticeship in Millstone Point, Connecticut, and came to live and work with Orlando on Mechanic Street. And he married, Burdick married, and then it came time for everybody to move from Mechanic Street up on the hill near the quarry, the new quarry operation. And what's interesting now to talk about Burdick, because while Orlando and his wife moved into the Babcock house, Burdick moved into a house on the east side of the road. And this house had to be eventually torn down because the quarry hole took over. And where the quarry hole is today was where his house was. And at that time, and I've learned this since I've talked to you last, there was a road that went, what we know Tower Street today was not Tower Street then. It went down across from where the water tower is now and went diagonally across the quarry hole and to about where School Street comes into Granite Street. So you can see where Burdick, living on the east side of the road, would be in jeopardy as far as the quarrying business went. But on the other side of the road, John Maycomber had started a quarry, and he's a contemporary of Orlando's, and he started a quarry, and Orlando bought him out and joined the two quarries. But to join the two quarries, he had to move the road, and he moved the road to where we know it is today. Now, this is very evident because if you look at what we call the Gorley house, where the Gorley family started, it doesn't face Tower Street, it faces a little further to the west, where the road would have been. And then the town had to build a water tower, so they built it on a ledge that they already owned, which was part of the old street, right smack in front of the Gorley house. Can you imagine having that in your front yard? Anyway, I thought it was interesting to find that moved over, and that's something that I've learned just in the last few years. So I pass that on for something for you to look at. Then they went on to, other quarrymen showed up. Westerly was not the first quarry in the world or in the country. The Millstone Point was a much older quarry. Of course, the Quincy was older quarry. There were older quarries in Concord, New Hampshire, Cape Ann, and up in Maine, and so forth, and across the country. But the western countries had not been developed at this time because it was a little too early for them. But there were many quarries and quarrymen that I'd just like to mention to you, because we are going to talk about people. John Maycomber, I already mentioned to you. I mentioned the Gorleys. John Maycomber owned the quarries up on High Street, and the Maycomber houses are still there today. And I think this Maycomber family is still living in some of them. But that ridge across in back of, or up above Craig Field and off Hunter Terrace, up in there, was John Maycomber started his big quarrying, and the Gorleys opened the Redstone Quarry, which is way over where, what's it, Route 89? What is that route? 78? Well, 78 goes right through the middle of the quarry hole now. And that's what he also opened up quarries in Charleston. I'm going to think of it in a minute. And then there was also people like Batterson and Crum, Fraser, Dixon, Murray. I must mention Murray. Murray ran a quarry in Connecticut, just to the west of New St. Michael's Cemetery. If you go over there sometime, and just before you go into the gate, you look immediately to your left, along the property line of the cemetery, and you'll see that the ledges are still very much overgrown. But that's where it started. And he had cutting then, and things that he did there were very much to do with building kinds of things. We think the Broad Street School had a lot to do with that. We know that the wall around the Hoxie property now, the church was done by him. St. Pius Church was done by Murray. And also the stone in the Armory. In passing, I'll mention that. There was also other quarries like the Fletcher Quarry down in Dunn's Corners area, Woody Hill Road, where they quarried stone for the schools in Kingston, when it was Kingston College, before it was university. It was Fitzgerald and Thompson, Platt, Thackeray, Leserine, and Barton, all east of Burton's Pond. And of course, I have to mention the Tamaqua Quarry, which was over in the Hopkinton side, just as you get above the Ashaway Bradford Road. So these were some of the quarries. These were quarries that really produced good material. The material was exceptional. The Westerly granite was used as the basis to measure and judge all granites in the United States. It was the zero granite. And even in Donald Bowner's shop, I'm saying even because it's as recent as his operation, where they would ask him to make certain size stones so they could go to the Bureau of Standards to be tested to maintain those standards for the granite. And the Westerly granite was not only even in grain, it was even in color. And it was at a strength of 35,000 pounds per square inch. We think we got good concrete when we got 5,000 pounds per square inch, but his 35,000. This is how much pressure could be applied to this, so it could stand up under a lot of weight. And another interesting thing is it's about 165 pounds per cubic foot. And aluminum is 166 pounds per cubic foot. But we're not used to, so it's very close to aluminum. And when you take, but we're not used to seeing aluminum so big and granite so thin. So, but these two materials weigh about the same. One thing we used to, when I was working for Donald Bonner, somebody would always come and want a new mooring for their skiff, and we had to make one out of stone. Well, that's the worst thing you can do, is make a mooring out of stone, because the weight of water is 1/2 the weight of granite. So when you submerge the granite, you lose half its weight. So it doesn't make very good sense to make an anchor out of granite. But another good thing about Westerly granites, even the hardest of them, was that they were safe, easy granite to work. And I'm talking about work by a man with hand tools. Machines can grunt through most anything, but man has to have something that he can work and work with some sort of progress. The industry grew very fast, and by the time we got to the mid-70s, remember it was in 46, Orlando died in 59. Burdick took over as the boss of the company with another man, William Pendleton, and they were agents for his business. And they ran this business in a very sophisticated manner. And I think a lot of this sophistication came from the Batterson or the New England Granite Company, who brought the business techniques and so forth into the industry in town, and the Smiths took a hold of that, and Batterson took a hold of Smith's techniques. So together, on top of Quarry Hill, between the two companies, the New England Granite Company, owned by Batterson, James Batterson from Hartford, was on Leadwood Avenue. So and of course the Smiths were down on the Granite Street, and the quarries were between the two companies. So they worked very closely together, and they were very, very, very efficient companies. And we could spend all evening talking about one or the other, but we'll just leave it right there that they were very capable, had fantastic sales organizations with offices from Chicago to Boston, and in up and down New York State and so forth. The first people that we used were the people at hand. They were the people that were living here at the time. And so they had to be taught. There were stone cutters already in this country. That, as I mentioned, Bob Burdick and many like him came. In those days, they traveled a lot. They worked in the south in the wintertime, and they worked up north in the summertime. And it was not uncommon for a journeyman to travel up and down the coast, working in various places. So they went on to, so the immigration that began to come over was probably about the time of the Civil War, maybe a little before. The Irish famine was not producing highly skilled people, but did produce a lot of unskilled labor, which is important as well. but it was all trainable people, and many of these people became very proficient in all kinds of occupations necessary in the granite industry. I've talked to you a little bit about the quarries, and there was the difference between the quarries that did nothing but quarry stone and sell it in the rough. There were many companies in town who did only the finishing by buying the material from the quarries and finishing it into a product. And there were those companies that did both, like the Smith Granite Company and the New England Granite Company, and a company by the name of Dixon Granite Company, which I began to get quite into. I hope somebody knows something about those people, because I'd like to hear about a little more. They're very, very proficient company. They were located, I think, about where Craig Field is now. They were quarrying up and back at John Maycomber and so forth. So they were in that area. Very capable company. There were other countries. I'm just going to name a few because you'll know it. There was the Newell Shed, which was the pre-runner of the Kaduri Granite Company. And Kaduri and Mazzoli bound together and formed a company there that did marvelous work for many, many years. For Queller and Bruiser, Columbia. E.C. King, Edwin King, had an unusual business. He was a statue cutter, and he lived and had a shop on the corner of Pierce Street and High Street, where there's a house now. It was an old barn. And he was a statue cutter, but he also bought models, and he would rent them out all over the country, of statues, of carvings, and so forth. So he had and that was a very good idea, because not everybody could afford models, but he could rent them for a short time, so that made it a good thing. But I won't go through all of these, but there were many, many of them, right down to our present day, when Donald Bonner was just finishing up his company, and Camoli's there, and Buzzy Memorial. Well, those are the three people that are working in it today. What made these up? And I want to get over this fast because, well, we're doing it, I guess. There were a lot of people involved. There were designers, listen to this, designers, engineers, draftsmen, sculptors, photographers and artists, setters, statue cutters, carvers, letter cutters, stone cutters, lathemen, polishers, lumpers. You know, a lumper, sounds a term you may not know. A lumper is a man who worked in the stone sheds and turned the stones for the stone cutters or for the statue cutters. Very difficult work, very careful work, and very precise work. Because way back in the days, the only thing they had to move these things were jacks, tremendous jacks. I was looking at one with Don Bonner the other day. It stood about this high, so wide, and so thick, and take 2 men to lift it. And these people did a marvelous job to turn these stones without damaging. Then we had polishers, I mentioned. Pavement cutters, quarrymen, drillers, hoisting engineers, blacksmiths, wheelwrights. Wheelwrights were necessary because we had to build wagons all the time. Stone chewed up wagons like you wouldn't believe. And they were constantly bending wheels, making wagons all the time. Riggers, teamsters, carpenters, mechanics, crane and locomotive engineers, railroad men. Those are the ones I thought of. I'm sure I missed somebody, but all proficient, the carpenter had to be special, because when you have a stone as such, and every finished stone had to be boxed. No finished stone left a shed that wasn't in a crate, a box of some kind. And when you box a stone, you can't have any wood touch the edges. So something has to be a piece of wood here and a piece of wood here, and the wood goes by that corner, you see. And these techniques were used many, many times. And so a carpenter was very, very proficient at that. And I've watched them all my life. The facilities started out very crude. All a stone cutter needed to do when he was cutting stone to begin with was muscle. He didn't need air, he didn't need light, and most of the time he didn't have any protection from the elements, so it was a fair weather job. And it was done in a time of the year when it wasn't freezing, so he could cut a stone anywhere. It came out of the ground and there it was. And there were a lot of these, some of these quarries, the Anguilla Quarry, which is on the other side of the Anguilla Brook in Connecticut, cut some beautiful cottage monuments that are in the Stoynton Cemetery, right there in the quarry. And the methods, we could get into at another time, are just unbelievable. The beautiful work they cut in the manner that they had to do it. Of course, one thing you got to remember, they didn't know any better, and we got something to compare it with. But they did a marvelous job. The sheds that we see today are what's left of those early rough type of stone sheds. Then the new studs come in with overhead cranes and even had heat, even had light distribution, which was much better. And I think that they did were much easier. One of the sheds I want to show you eventually, and I mention it now and I'm going to tell you again, is the statue cutting building. At New England and at Smith Granite Company, they were stone buildings. They were buildings laid up with rubble, but they were made of stone. The doors were so fashioned that the lintels could come out and you could move a bigger stone in, a higher stone, and so forth. And we'll see reasons why we had to do that a little later. But I have written down just a few people here, and this is where we're going to get into names, so be careful here. These are just people that had the capability of carving a statue. Briefly, a granite statue, is always cut from a model. A model is made by a sculptor. He is the designer. He is the educator on proportions, muscle tones, and all that kind of thing. And so then the model is laid down here and the stone beside him, and he cuts this stone to look like this model. And they keep turning both at the same time. You don't cut one half, the front of the statue, and then turn over and cut the back. You keep cutting round and round. Each time you go around, you get a little closer to the finish. Until eventually you stand him up, or her up, and you finish it in vertical. Here, I'm going to read them, and you'll know some of the names. James Paulette, Joseph Bedford, Angelo Zeberini, Columbus Zeberini, Edward Fuller, Charles Lena, Frank Garibaldi, John Duraki, Fortunato Zangrandi, I like to say that one, James Richards, George Camoli, E.H. Moriarty, Mansueto Camoli, Charles Rizzi, Battista Bartonelli, Joseph Gervasini, Xavier Stradler, John Galley, Charles Catoni, John Francis Brines, Ferruccio Camoli, Richard Camoli, Nicholas Vasillo, Antonio Pinardi, Edward King, and Angelo Buzzi. Now I'm sure some of you can relate to some of those words, some of those people. The Zeberinis were famous for their, and so was James Paulette, who lived right here on School Street. The first house above, what do we call those apartments on School Street? No. The first house up was where Paulette lived. That was his house. So, and we know where the Zeberinis lived, and we know where Columbus lived. In fact, I got a record of Columbus in a company store. And I knew what day he worked and what day he bought these things at the store. That determined it. I knew where he lived, and I knew where he worked, and I knew what job he was working on, and I knew what he bought. So that day I could see how he went to work, did what work he did. He went to the store and came home, and what he came home with. So I think that was kind of interesting that we could construct his day 100 years later. I mentioned Richard Camoli, which is our present president of the town council. It was his father, Ferruccio Camoli, who worked at the Smith Granite Company. And among other famous things he did, he cut the Bowdoin bear. The Bowdoin bear is the big polar bear that's at Bowdoin College. So if you go there, be sure to look at the Bowdoin bear. He did that. Angelo Buzzi was a early stonecutter here and went into business, and his son Harold, still over there in Wiggity-Quack, did a lot of work in Washington, D.C. So you see, these are the kind of people that were very, very talented. Now, there's 26 or 27 of these I just gave you, and everyone capable to do what we're going to see. Now, Also, I'm going to talk about, we talk about names. I want to talk about some interesting people that were stonecutters and very able to do wonderful work. And I love some of the names, like the first one I got is Absalom Francis. Now, how many people you know him by the name of Absalom? So Absalom Francis, I think that's a great one. He was a marvelous stonecutter. Like the next man, Jeremiah D. Craddock. Jeremiah D. Craddock was a stonecutter that could do anything. He could cut letters. He could do some carving. He could do the unusual. He could put the ventilators in a mausoleum structure. That was a very delicate thing to do. And once you cut this big thing, you can't make any mistakes by putting in the ventilator, because this thing is thousands of dollars into it already. So he was the kind of guy that could do that. Joseph Pizzetti, that's Chief Pizzetti's father, lived on Leadwood Avenue. Marvelous carver, marvelous carver. I'll point out some of his work. Edwin Pasco lives in Cottage Court. His house is there today. Beautiful front steps, a granite walk leading right down, hand-pointed granite walk into his house. Marvelous. Alexander McFarland, John McFarland's father. John just passed away here within a few months. His grandfather, lived in Newton Flats. And he was cut lettuce all his life, almost to the day he died, and was a marvelous letter cutter. Letter cutter was very important back in these days, and I'm talking 80s and 90s, 1880s, 1890s. And because there were no sandblast arrangements then, so the letter had to be drawn on paper, transferred to the stone, and they would actually, on a piece of paper, they would glue it to the stone. And then they would trace the letters out through the tracing paper onto the stone, and then they would cut the letters from their marks. A marvelous technique. Another man I want to mention is Matthias Wicklund. Matthias Wicklund, love the name. Matthias Wicklund. Wicklund Street, Wicklund Avenue, that's named after his family. He lived right to the north of it. That was Wicklund. That's the only street in town nobody lives on, isn't it? Okay, Frank Cook, marvelous letter cutter again. He cut a stone, his stone is in River Bend, like most of these fellows, and his daughter died young. And Donald Bonner's father tells me, and knew him personally, that when he cut the stone for his daughter, and he cried all day long. Alexander Beatty, Bill Beatty, John Street people, great people. Charles Fontana, Carlo Mazzoli, William Mudge, Bob Mudge's father. Frank Bianchi, also on John Street, marvelous steps and front walks. Charles Harmon, these are people I knew. Charles Harmon from Franklin Street, Curtis Autry from Hobart Street, Carl Carlson from Hobart Street, Charles Ruger, Albert Santoro, Andrew Lowe, John Cameron, George Stenhouse, Robert Mearns, a great surfacing machine man, John Lawrence, another one, James Conway, a good friend of mine, dear friend of mine, and a polisher, Thomas Holliday. That would be a great uncle to Bill Holliday in the restaurant. And Frank Bernasconi and Thomas Ahern, another polisher. Just a touch on the people in this town. But I think that they're good. I'm getting a signal, I gotta hurry up. Same thing I can talk about quarrymen. I still have Barbara Benson looking at me. And I want to talk about Barbara. She's a good friend of mine too. And her father, Babcock-Smith, was a tool boy in the Smith Granite Company. And her grandfather, Babcock-Smith, was a stonecutter there. But he wouldn't let his son be a stonecutter, and that's why he ended up as a florist. Am I right, Barbara? That's right. So that happened more than once. And we had a similar thing in quarrymen, and I just did this afternoon. The quarrymen began to be very important because they had to learn how to quarry the stone. Every quarry is different. In Westerly, the quarries lay in natural sheets, natural beds from a few inches to many feet thick. and it slants about 10 degrees to the south. And it's about 80 or 90 foot thick. So you follow this big vein down when you quarry. So that means the further you go south, the more overburden you have. And this is one of the reasons why it costs so much in Westerly Granite, because our overburden was so deep, and they didn't have the techniques that we have today with bulldozers and earth movers and all these mechanical devices so highly developed to move this material. So this was all done by muscle of men and beast, and so that it was very slow. And this had to be done all the time. But they had to learn how the quarry works. You have the rift, which we would call a grain in the wood, the easy way to break. The second way would be facing east and west, and the hard way would be north and south. And that meant that was the way that was most difficult to break. And it was a bigger gamble. When you drill all your little holes in and you put all your wedges in and you hit that, is that going to run under and lose it because it's undersized? Or is it going to run out and maybe too much, so it has to be more taken off? So that was very difficult. So you didn't break on the head too much. You drill on the head. You always channeled on the head. I'll get to that. I'd like to give a lecture on just quarrying procedures someday, so we'll work on that. But I just mentioned a few people you might know that were in the Cerenza brothers, Sam and James Cerenza. They're the grandfathers of the boys in the Cerenza engineering now. That is, Sam is. Santo Sposato, marvelous man. Frank Turano, and Oscar Force, and Michael Turano, and Gordon McCall, and Angelo Gingarelli. Angelo Gingarelli, that's Banji. Everybody remembers Banji? I'm sure some of you remember Banji. He was a founder of the Best Eaten Donuts. This is his father. And when we were boys, it was Mr. Gingarelli. It was no fooling around, but he was a very dignified man. And we'll see a picture of him. Louis Giorno, and so on. I won't go through all these, but I will mention Capizano. Leonard Capizano worked at Sullivan Granite Company all his life, lived on Tower Street. His son, Patsy Capizano, was a very skilled man in the sandblast world and developed sandblast carving, leading the industry in that sort of thing. So we're very blessed with a tremendous amount of talent across the town. The side of this hill, Lena, who was the statue cutter, Charles Lena, had a studio in the basement of his house on the corner of Chester Avenue and Granite on the uphill side. You come up Chester Avenue going towards Granite, you look at it, you'll see that it's a full basement in back. That's where he taught art there. He taught classes there. All of the statue cutters quite often had their own studio. There were people like Barr and Porsche and Edwards and that were sculptors that taught art in their own, had their own studios, and went on from here to do marvelous things. Edwards went on to do the statue for Frederick Douglass, the great Negro emancipator. That's a long story, but that's the kind of talent they got into. So what I want to show you now, this is a first, I got an overhead picture here of a monument. This is a war memorial that was cut in 1902. And it's in Cambridge, Ohio. In fact, Gertrude and I found this. We went out and found it. And that's not the reason I've shown it tonight. I'm showing it for other reasons. But we have witnessed this thing, and it's as beautiful today as it was put up in 1902. And this was put up by Edward Brown. That's Mildred Bray's grandfather, right? And he was the setter. All of these big monuments had a setter. Smith Granite Company would send a setter and a carload of derricks and rigging and whatever he needed to put this up. And then after he got there, the first thing he did was make himself known to the railroad agent, and then he would make himself known, in this case, to the mayor, and then he would begin to put it together. And it would be shipped out to him, of course, with the bottom stones as they came along. And this is an interesting piece of work here, because there was there's a statue here, and one on the back, which is the sailor. And this is the cavalryman over here. And this is what you call a group statue with a mother and child, or son. And that's cut out of one piece, and that was cut by a man named Camoli. This one up here is the infantryman, and he was cut by Paulette. And we'll see who cut all these in just a minute. But I wanted to show you the name. Here's Matthias Wicklund, who did the carving. William Higgins. Frank B. Cook, who did the lettering. Joseph Recchia. Do anybody remember Recchia's store on Granite Street? That's him. I remember him as a grumpy old guy, but he was a very capable man. His daughter came to Donald many years later, and they needed a stone in the cemetery. And when I was a boy, he had carved a rose, and he kept it under glass in the store. And I remember looking at it for years and years. And that stone, that rose, was incorporated into that monument. Isn't that right now? And that's at River Bend now. Really quite a nice thing. So he was quite a guy. John Rowe was a great polisher. Alexander McFarland, we mentioned him as a letter cutter. D. Bernasconi, and so on. John Sherry was a great polisher. And Daniel Kelleher, another letter cutter and trimmer. And Ed Pasco, the man who lived in Cottage Court. But this is quite a monument. And I want to show you some more people that worked on this thing.
You might tell them that this is from the order, one of the order.
Oh yeah, that's right. This is a page out of the order book. And I have 26 of these books, and half of them are now on computer. That is the important ones. So we're talking people, and here's some more people that worked on it. Also, we'll see that it was sold by the Van Almering Granite Company, which was an agent for the Smith Granite Company, and then went into business for themselves in Boston, Massachusetts, had a great in with the veteran organizations in all of the cemeteries and battlefields across the Civil War battlefields in the country. Did a fantastic job. It says that it was ordered on the 28th of July, 1902, delivered and set in Cambridge, Ohio, May 2nd, 1902. So you see, from that's when they wanted to set it, but I don't understand that. It looks like it was ordered before it was set. 21. No, it isn't. I don't figure that one out. Well, anyway, we know where it was. It cost us it cost $10,250 when we add all this up. And here's Edward Brown, the setter, right here. And these are all the people. Tom Holliday, we mentioned, and so forth. You might read those down there. I don't want to. And here's this George Camoli, who cut those two figures. We paid him $642 to cut that statue. And that was probably, he was probably getting paid around 98 cents an hour, or something like that. It's terrible. But anyway, those are the things. And Reg Opie's father, this is Richard Opie, who was a great carver and stone cutter too. And Michael Burke, Joseph Downey, Johnny Joyce. Remember Joyce? John Joyce ran the gas station up on top of the hill. That's part of that. George Camoli again. And down here we'll see where the infantryman was cut by James Paulette, and the artilleryman was cut by H.E. Moriarty, the cavalryman by James Baldy, and the sailor by James Richards. And those are pretty, and you can see how much we paid them: $400, $440, $398, and $436 and $429. I looked to see how long it would take them to do that. It looks like they did about 3 months to do one of these statues. Anytime anybody wants to break in. Well, here's the shipping date. 1903. That makes more sense to me, too. So when I've had a wonderful time looking at people. I'll just show you this briefly, because this gets old after a while. These transparencies I taken right from the page. We don't do this too often because these books are quite old, and I'm afraid that if we did it too much, we would wear the books out and they're irreplaceable. But I hope to have a scanner, which I've been playing with for some time, that we can scan these things and it won't be quite so tough on the books. But I wouldn't dare bring one out of the house. I made that a rule a long time ago. Again, I just want to talk about this one. Here's Joseph Kaduri. This is the beginning of the Kaduri Granite Company before he was there. And Jeremiah Craddock, we already talked about. Daniel Murray, Fred Parker, Alexander Beatty, another Fred Parker. And here's Paulette down here cut this statue again. We paid him $360 to do that. And here's our Alexander McParlin again as a letter cutter. So, people are really wonderful to talk. I just, Gertrude has watched me from time to time. At evenings, I'll spend too much time just looking at work in these books and the work that they did and how they did it. And I'm going to just show you these obelisks. And these are obelisks that were cut at these various dates. If we start at the right, this was the Proctor shaft, we call it by the trade, obelisk. It's in Boston, Massachusetts, and it was cut in 1898. And when it was all done, it weighed 46 tons, and it was 39 foot high. And we'll have pictures of that. It cost $6,500 in 1896. And these are interesting because in the process, I'll just mention it, they had developed a machine that would cut a big surface. It was a marvelous adventure for things, a stone this big, and for roof stones on mausoleums, which were very big, as much as 20 feet long and 8 feet wide. And would run anywhere from 2 to 20 inches thick. So those were big stones, and this machine could put those surfaces on. So that's why this became available. And then this one is a little older. This was in 1885. This was went to La Crosse, Wisconsin, and it was to commemorate a former governor of Wisconsin, Governor Washburn. And this was, it cost $12,000, and it weighed 87.5 tons altogether. This is in several pieces. This is 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then the big shaft is in one piece. Then this is the biggest one. This was 102.5 tons, also $12,000 in 1896. And this one was done with that machine. This one was not. This one was not. This one was, and this one was done with that machine I just mentioned. It was 57.3 feet high. That's 57 foot 4 inches high. And it, how'd you like to stand that up? On top of a pedestal. Not on the ground, on top of a pedestal. And this is in Woodlawn Cemetery in New York City. And we'll see this one a little more right now, because we're going to look at pictures. Is there any questions? I know I left somebody out, but I got Babcock-Smith in, didn't I? I'm going to slide this over. And Mary, you make sure I don't put it in front of you. Let's see. Okay, who's got the lights? Here we start. See, I'm going to have a pulpit too, Pastor, see? This is an aerial view of the Smith Granite Company. And why I keep talking Smith Granite Company is it's the only company in town that left such complete records. I wish the Kaduri Granite Company had left some of the records that they did, because they did some marvelous work. And and others. But the Smith Granite Company kept these order books over the years and made it very, very important to be able to tell you about the industry from that point of view, which was pretty much a good thing to measure the whole industry by. This is, of course, Granite Street, Tower Street, School Street. This is where Hoxie has his building right in here now. This is where the shopping center is in here, like this. This is where the bowling alley is right in here, right about in here, right where this pond is. This is the Babcock-Smith House. The credit union is in here, and so forth. So I orient you. This was taken in about 1930. In 1928, they had, when they built this shed here was built in 1910, and it had skylights in it, and it didn't work too good. And so they took them out in 1928. So I'm giving them a couple of years. So it's about 1930 that this happened. And Camposano had already built his restaurant here. Now, remember I talked to you about his water tower, and this is the quarry hole, the first quarry hole in back of Hoxie's, which they quarried in that quarry hole for 90 years. And this is where the road went down through here, and I think it came in about like that, see? Because this was the road that went from Thompson's dock down at the yacht club where we know it today, at Thompson's Corners, came up East Avenue and Granite Street and up this road and on over to Meeting House Bridge in Hopkinton. That was the main road in town. And one of the reasons that Dr. Babcock built his house halfway between the two centers of town at the time. But this is much later. This was the company store. Oh, by the way, today I heard they're going to tear that down. Yeah, and that's kind of a shock to me. That's just a rumor. I have all the reason to pay attention to it, though. And it's a beautiful building. You'll never see another one like it. That was built by Daddy Holliday. So this was the first modern shed here, built 1885. They built another one up in here, but that burned down in 1901. These were polishing buildings and turning. This was the engineering and drafting room and so on. This eventually became this was the studio here for the sculptors along the street and the statue cutters cutting back. This was eventually converted into the Smith Granite Company office in 1928. So these are the quarry holes. So this is the number one. This number two is in here. Well, it looks like snow. It's actually stone dust and reflection on the granite. The dark is the water. This was the New England hole. This was the Smith East quarry, the second one. And then this was the last quarry working, as I remember. I never saw these work except this one and this one. And they were, these are full of water. And this is the railroad system that went around here, switched out, and went out to the main line. Any question or feature? So we'll go to the next one. This is showing where we're quarrying right up near the top. And this is before they built the water tower, you see? And see how close it is? Look at the size of stone. This is what they call a shear pole, because it would give them a lot of vertical lift. It did move back and forth a little bit. Okay, right, we're going to move along here. This shows you how they did it. We didn't need many air compressors, and we didn't have to have a lot of vehicles or machinery. We needed a man, a hammer, and a drill, and a box of wedges. And this is what happened. This is an early quarry, and see how close it is to the top. Okay? Again, I just show you this for how close it is to the top. To me, I never saw anything close to the top. Everything was very deep in my day. And, but you can see where they were quarrying up here. These are Lewis holes. This is where they put powder in to crack the stone. And here's a line on here getting ready to be drilled in there. And there's the men that have quarried this piece of stone under this hole, and now they're taking off the excess. If we had saws 50 years before we eventually did, mind the way we would be quarrying stone today. We threw away half of it. This is, I do this as a picture of animals, and across, oh, this is New England granite on Leadwood Avenue. This house still stands there right now, you'll see that. And this is the size, I talked about building wheels. Look at the size of this wheel. And we'll look at that a little later. Okay? Is this thing squared away all right? This is, I begin to show you how the crude sheds they were. Here's the edge of the quarry. And this is what a stiff leg derrick, which they could set up very quickly. And this is just kept the rain off them, and they would drag the stone in this side, and the oxen would go right through, and they'd drop the stone and take off. This was the ox barn. This is the Babcock-Smith House as we know it today, and so on. Okay? This is the first hole. This is the first hole again, looking a little further southwest. This is the high wheels that we just mentioned. See how high they are? The axle was way up here, up to the height of a man. And the stone, they'd straddle a stone with a chain around the stone that was on an axle here, and they would pull this lever down with a block and tackle, wind the stone up, and lift the stone, to chain up, and lift the stone off the ground, and the oxen would walk away with it swaying underneath the axle of those high wheels. Again, we'll see some work set up here for approval that have been cut. These are some, look at this fellow out in the open cutting stone. These are the houses down on Chester Avenue. Okay. This is the same angle, a little further back. I did a little more quarrying since the last picture. You'll see the old sheds in here, and you'll see that big modern shed, 1885. Notice the shear here, and the stone up here. This is right, this leg here is right on the corner of the old Maxon machine shop on Granite Street. And this one, the cars are backed right up to this leg. We can still see the socket, the stone that's hollowed out to support those stiff legs. This is a very unstable edge, so I don't ask anybody to go near those. But I want you to know that we're going to refer to this ledge again, so just make a note of that. Here we have a steam pump, not an electric pump. This is before electric. And so a man had to tend this steam pump every day, all year round, to keep the water out of this hole, or you would lose the hole. Of course, in the winter, it froze up a lot, but we still had to keep it pumping. And there was stairs and coal chutes down to keep it going. Okay? This is further east. Again, I show you the shear. This, I'm just going to mention this quickly. This is where they backed a team too close here, and it went over and it pulled the oxen down, and they were killed down here. And so they brought the butchers from the store down here, and they butchered the oxen right there. Imagine. But that's a true story. The fellow that backed it over, his name was Shea, so they called him Butcher Shea for the rest of his life. And this was, I mentioned this modern shed that they built up near the quarries. This was just like the one near the road. It burned in 1901. Again, this is our water tower that we refer to. Okay? That's the same angle, but much later. We're getting down here now about 160 feet. We don't need a shear anymore as much as we did when we had these logs were here, so when they brought the stone up from the quarry, they would slide up those logs and not get caught in any of this stonework here, and that was probably a good idea. These were the big derricks that were coming in now, the big boom derricks, which could move around all kinds of angles, do what's better. Okay? There's one. He's coming up with a piece of stone, and it's still got a shear pole over on the other side. That's the same derrick, but a different angle. This is looking at the Smith side. Okay? And now they thought it would last forever. No end to it, you know? But look at it laying in here. Look, here's the natural beds that I told you about. See them laying in here? And this is you can just see part of a Lewis hole here, where we would split it here. The head is this way. So we've cut, this is a channel, which the stone is, I'll show you a better picture of a channel later. But there's that cutting shed up there we were talking about. Here's the chain. Look at the size of that chain that's being to drag this stone over, which is 32 feet long, 6 by 6 by 2. See the wood that's laid in there so this chain will not touch the stone. We don't squeeze the stone with that chain and start a crack. We don't want to do that. So it squeezes the wood instead. That's why you have so much dunnage around. Everywhere there's dunnage. And they pull these up. Here's a channel in here. They cut, this is the hard way to cut. So you cut on the channel and you blast it on the second way, and this is the rift this way. Very important to know all the time you're working on granite. Okay, Dwight? Interrupt anytime somebody has a question. Again, I show you lasts forever. They just piled it up, piled it up, piled it up, never, and the waste was terrible. They would send everything in this day that we're looking at, they would send to the quarry for a stone that would make 4 feet long and 2 feet wide and 1 foot thick. So it would come up to them 6 foot long and 4 foot 6 or 5 feet wide and probably 2 foot thick. And all that had to be knocked off and thrown away and for the finished product. And before it got that good, the quarry got through kicking it around a little bit too and took off a lot of stone. So the quarrymen would never want to be called where they sent a stone up to the stone shed that wouldn't make, that wasn't big enough. So that was, they always made sure it was big enough, plenty big. Again, here's a nice OSHA ladder. You see this? These fellows with the hard hats, you know this. Okay, right. Oh, this is a prize picture. This is a picture, we know who the boss is. And again, I just show you the granite. Look at it laying in here on thick ledges. Here's a block that's all come out, the drill holes all around it. And here's a man, they just prying this piece loose from the natural bed, and they got a crowbar in here. Then they put a chain on it, they put all these guys on a chain. And these crowbars, in fact, Donald Bonner has just given a crowbar similar to this to the library's granite collection. And on the end of this thing, quite often, and I think I can see it there, the blacksmiths always made a ball, oh, maybe 4 inches in diameter, on the end so that the chain would never slip off and all those guys would fall down, you see. And it was very important that they had a little confidence in what's going to happen here. So they would pull this out, and when they would open that crack up a little bit, this man here would put a wedge in it, and the crack would get bigger and bigger and bigger until eventually they could get a chain on it and get it out. But that's what I'm talking about, man using a lot of muscle. Today we would do things much differently. Look at the size of chain on here. These chains were so big that the man couldn't handle them. You had to handle them with a derrick. They would lift it up, and the technique of wrapping it around was all done by the derrick. Donald Bonner always tells me a story about coming over from the mill. Was it the Bradford mill? Some mill, he wanted the biggest chain they could get.
He wanted the biggest chain he had.
Wanted the biggest chain he had. So he says, where is it? So she says, what's around the back? He said, oh, I'll go pick it up. You don't have to. Oh, you better let me come and help you. So Donald comes out and he gets the derrick and he hooks onto the crane, he picks it up and he puts it in the truck, and the truck kind of went right down. And I guess it was...
5 inch and 4 wire.
And it probably had links on it like this. They were pretty big. But we got away from that into to steel chains. Okay. Here's what I'm talking about, people. This is the east quarry. This is the most easterly derrick. This had a mast of 90 feet. It had a boom in here of about 86 feet or something like that. And it was, this eventually went to Barry, Vermont after the quarry was closed. And these are the people that are always pushing back, uncovering. See, we quarried way up in here. Here's a man running a steam drill. This is the rack that he can move the steam drill back on, and channel doing this kind of thing. A channel is a series of holes that's drilled very uniformly by the drill traveling on this thing here every 2 inches, and he puts down the drill, and the driller would have a thing like this with a little tongue on the end of it, and he'd put down the hole and he'd feel that, to feel for the natural bed. Then he knew he was through. And another hole, another hole. And then a core cutter would come, same machine, different bit on it, and it'd break down the web between the holes, and we'd end up with a channel. That's how it was done in the old days, and it was very effective. And you'll see, this is a half of a channel. The other half has gone away, and so forth. Another OSHA ladder. Okay.
Mike,
Yes.
you explain how they moved the derrick back, if they wanted to go back 10 feet.
Well, you mean the top one or the whole derrick?
The whole derrick, they moved the whole derrick back,
Yeah, standing up.
standing up.
Yeah. Go back to the other shot, can you? In here, which they put a track underneath it. It could be railroad track, it could be rollers, and they would take this stone, a platform underneath, and they'd roll that right back like that. They let the guys out over here and take the guys in over here, keep the thing going. And one time they had a guy there, and they were putting up a gin pole. A gin pole is a temporary pole that you put up, it's a little smaller, so that you take a hitch on a big mast, and you stand the big mast up like this. And they were putting up this gin pole. And he looks up like that, and the clouds were going by. He thought the thing was coming over, and he ran away. The whole thing come down. Okay. Again, I want to show you, again, the dunnage. Look at the size of these chains. Look at that. I hope he doesn't stay there too long. And these are deep holes. The channels in here. And look at these tied in here together. When I worked on the quarry, you had a chain, and you had a chain, and you had a chain. And you had this stone to move. It was up to you to figure how to move that with those 3 chains. When I went to work at Electric Boat, they had a chain for everything. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. Okay. This is, now we're coming to a modern age. This actual picture was taken in the North Quarry. This is in the north part of town. And this was a deep hole, very deep hole. And we're quarrying saw blocks here. And this means that we're actually going to take this stone and into a store, into a building that will cut this into slabs. And so our waste is going to be minimized. So up she comes, came out of here. And this Alec Palm was the boss here. Oscar Force, I mentioned him tonight, worked in this hole. And it probably had much to do with taking these out. But look how deep these beds are. This was a very desirable stone. This was the dark pink. And when it ran good, it ran good. And when it ran bad, it ran bad. I mean, it was nothing. We do work all winter, and it was nothing. I went away to school, and we came home on vacation. And it was spring vacation, and they had been drilling all winter, cutting these channels and things that I've talked to you about. And there was a piece of stone as long as this room, and probably half as wide, and probably 8 foot deep. And they were going to break this loose. And of course, there's a tremendous amount of labor and money going into this thing. So it was a big investment. And this is one of the things why banks don't like quarrymen, you know. And so we're going to blow this. We're going to put the Lewis holes in and pop this over. And my father got permission for me to stay home one more day to see that come out. And it came out very well. But that was one of the good ones. A lot of them didn't always come out because sometimes those big sheets would have a hump in the middle. And when you bumped against that, it had nowhere to go, and it fractured the whole thing. And the loss of material was great. Okay, Dwight? Now we're back off Granite Street again. This is our famous tower. Here's a Westerly House. Here's where we thought the road went down to here. This is a picture of the early company store. This is the powerhouse, and here's the beginning of the stone sheds. It has one chimney. Now the chimney is not there to keep the people warm. The chimney is there to keep the tools warm so you can hold on to them. In the wintertime, you can't hold cold steel. So you always left your tools around the fire when you went home in the cold weather. Again, the door on the opposite side, you just haul the stone through. Here's a picture of the high wheels with the lever up, the stone underneath, and he'll pull that lever down and raise that stone up underneath that axle and go away. I played on the last few of these. It must have been about 14 foot in diameter, pretty big thing. And it had an iron tire, and they used to build a wheel of wood, and then they would the blacksmiths would build the tire, and they were pretty good geometry people because they always fit. And they would put a fire around these, and they got real hot. I don't know if they got red hot, but almost. And then a lot of men would come and with tongs, and they'd pick that thing up, and they'd put it down over the wood wheel, got it all lined up good, and then they would quench it, and the expansion, and contract it right onto the wooden wheel, and that was it. There was no bolts, no rivets, no nothing. Held it all together. Again, this is a hill church. This was built in the late 1700s, like 1798 or something like that. It was called the Babcock Church because all of the ministers a lot of the early ministers were all Babcocks. It lost its roof in the hurricane of 15. It was torn down in 1900, and Reg Opie built his house there, which is there today. This is the Walcott House. This is the Smith House, Bill Smith House. Okay? Here is the two buildings on each side. Notice the chimneys, the frequency of the chimneys is very far apart. Here's a fellow had a long stone, so he built a little sunshade out here to protect himself. And then they just board up the door here. This is finished work, meaning that the rough work came in from here, the finish came out. You never wanted to mix the finish and the rough stock together because the handling was so different people. These people that handled this were much more careful and able than the guy that had a chain around a stone pulling along with an oxen. Okay, and any questions? Interrupt me. This was the carpenter shop in those days. Okay. That's that same alley we were looking at, but I wanted to show you this building here and this building here. This is where the statue cutters are working. See the skylights here, and they have a chimney. They were kept warm all winter. Their work was a little fastidious, and their time was all important because they had to cut a statue in 3 months, so you couldn't take the winter off. You had to keep going. So these people work year-round, and these are the lintels that came out so you could move a tall stone through. There's a pavement cutter working in here, cutting up spoiled stone that came out of here, spoiled for some reason. In manufacturing, or they found a flaw in it while they were working or something. But this is finished work being cut up into pavement block. This is the blacksmith shop, where many chimneys, many forges. In the high section in the middle was a device that they used for picking up the oxen, a big belly band, because when you had to shoe oxen in the quarry because there was so many chips thrown around. And so to shoe an oxen, you have to pick him up. He can't stand on 3 legs like a horse. So you had to pick him up. So that's what that was. And this is where the oxen lived, and the farm was all over and back. There were 3 accounts: quarry account, the cut and shed account, and the farm account. The farm was never to make money. It was there to support the others. The quarries are back here. And way back here is the outhouse. See there? It's a long walk to the outhouse. But anyway, there it is. This is looking kind of southeast. Burden's Pond would be way, way over here. And there was all houses back in here now. Okay? Am I standing in your way, Mildred?
How many oxen?
Beg your pardon?
How many oxen did you have to have?
There were 20 yoke of oxen, 40 head. And this is the farm, 40 head of oxen. They had about anywhere from 12 to 15 milking cows, a few heifers. They had at least three teams of working horses, 2 carriage horses, at least 2 carriage horses. This was the farm. And the farmer, his name was Mr. Utter. He lived in a little house where the credit union is now. And he had in his farm probably employed as many as 7 or 8 men that just cared for the animals and and running the fields and so forth. The property went from Tower Street to Wells Street. That was the front of it. And it went back to the Crandall property in District Number 6. Of course, the greater part of the eastern part of it was the cedar swamp. But that's how big it was. And it needed all that land to support all those animals. They had one fellow that roamed all of New York State and New England to buy the biggest oxen he could find, because that's the kind of strength they needed. This is a quick view. Remember I told you about the big jack these guys used to turn the stones? Look at that thing. That must weigh 300 pounds, I don't know. But they would go in here. They would take these stones out here and these windows to make that bigger. Again, they had ventilators. And these were rollers. They're going to roll that stone in. They're going to make a statue out of that. Okay. Here's the sculptors. We think this is Edwards and this is Barr. This is we can identify, this is the Coon statue at River Bend. This is the Marsh Base, which is down in Virginia. And we can identify a few of these. And this is what the studio is. And again, they have steam heat, you see. They keep them nice and warm. Okay. This is a statue cutting building. This is the doors and those windows that I said you take out. There's the skylights. And they had steam heat. This time, this must be getting up near 1900. And we can identify everybody in here. This is Edward Fuller here, and this is the Severinis back here. And I think this is Paulette, and this man here is Lena, and I think this is John Daraki. And but this is a wonderful picture. This is not uncommon. The library has a beautiful copy of this blown up bigger. And it's just wonderful to keep this, to think that how they would lay, this is the model. This is a pointing machine here that the statue cutter uses for reference points. There are points on the statue, the same points on the stone. And these would fit, and he would have these measuring devices that he would slide right into that point. And he would say, well, I'm 4 inches off the finish, and I want to rough it down to 2 inches off the finish. And they would do that from point to point to where the statue began to take shape. And when I was in Italy, we have all these beautiful statues and stuff around there. And everybody's talking about statue cutters and things. And nobody seemed to know how it's done. And I kept telling them, you got to have a model. You can't make these things without a model, and there's points. And we didn't get to where we got to Florence. And we went into the exhibit there, and there was a model with all the points on his face. And I finished my lecture to those people right there. But that showed you how it's done even back then. So this is a pointing machine, and this is full of roughing out a statue. Okay. This is a stone shed. This must have been Sunday morning. I never saw a stone shed so clean in my life. And but look at the derby for the hard hat, runner of the hard hat. We were able to identify some people by the stones that we were able to identify. Notice that this has an overhead crane. It is not powered. It is, you pull it with an endless rope, with a worm gear kind of drive. But look at the knee braces in here, like a ship. Look at this. No diagonals. That's a knee brace right out of a tree. This was cut. I'm trying to think. This is the east side. Granite Street was out over here. And it was really quite a wonderful invention to have a cart down the middle to transfer the stone on this overhead crane. Made a whole different way of handling and turning stone. Okay. Here's the stone sheds that I remember. Everything, all over everything. And we never had enough time or enough people to pick up chips. And it was even, at some time, we had to do some of the work on the weekend just to get it cleaned up to work. But look at the size of these stones in here. And this is Smith's, this is the polishing mills down here. And These are the men working on the stones, as you can see. And this had a big overhead crane up here. You could just see the bottom of it. This was capable of picking 15 ton. And we eventually did pick 15 ton or better. Okay. This is a picture of, we talked about how many oxen we wanted. And this is a group, this is that shaft we talked about when I showed you the Washburn staff. This is going to Wisconsin. They built a special wagon to take it down Granite Street. This is in '85. This is before the railroad was up to the quarry. And they took this down Granite Street. And see, there's a log in here that they would jam in the wheel to break it so that it would slow it down. Well, the big thing was to slow it down going down Granite Street. And they would take all the oxen off the front, except one or two, a yoke or two yokes to steer it with, and the rest is there with the yoke right up on their horns, holding it back. And this was the Smith Granite Company office. This is Granite Street, and this is the Babcock-Smith House. And this is a monument of the 13th Massachusetts Volunteers, which is set up in Gettysburg, and we've been to see that too. This is the flag bearer, is the name of the statue, and it was cut many, many times by different people. But this went on down, and the car was made special, and I don't know how they did it, but the ramp went up the front end of the car, and so did and they left the wagon and the stone right on the car, down to the station, and then they went off the other side, dug away the ramp, and it went on to Wisconsin on the wagon, and they used it again out there to transport it, to stand it up. Again, I want you to show you how that's boxed. It's completely covered. Looks like a new piano. Okay. Here it is, all done. Isn't that a majestic thing? Not a very good picture, but at least we can see the elements. It was quite wonderful to get this. Okay? And this is the Proctor one that's going to Boston. And how many teams of horses we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, I can see. 4 teams pulling this obelisk. It's on this makeshift wagon, very crude wheels. And all these guys, all these fellas steer those horses. Look at this. Don't know much about horses. But anyway, this went on to be the Proctor one. Okay, Dwight? And that is the Proctor. Isn't that another thing? That's pretty nice, too. But I just can't imagine how these fellas stood this stone up on that thing there, not letting it touch until the last fraction of an inch. Comes down on big lead pads, set in from the corners, maybe in this case, probably 2 to 3 inches in from each corner. And then this stuff comes down on that, and of course it's going to squeeze them out a little bit. And then there will be some setting compound of some sort in there to keep the water out of it. And that is, but to think how you could manage that thing so carefully, so slowly, to come to that very point. And it sits there forever. And these, I don't think these have any tenon or dowels in it. Not these, they're too big. Okay. Now I want to call your attention. Remember I said watch those ledges in this quarry. This is the number 1 hole. Watch that. Okay? Good. Here's those same ledges up here. We've quarried this away, and we found a big ledge in here. See how high that is? I think it says it's 10'6" high. And we got to have a big shaft coming out here, another big obelisk. And we found one long enough, deep enough to make it. So they've all winter cut these channels, and they were so careful with this that they cut a channel along the back too. They couldn't take a chance on the run of the stone losing it because it was so big and so important to get this. So it was channeled not only on the head, but on the second wing. Then they're going to turn it down, and they're collecting wood here. See this pile of wood here? There'll be some more. And they're hooking outriggers to this. See the chains laying here? And they're going to pull these, and they're going to turn that stone down. And there's a man here. I think it's my grandfather. We have the same figure, you know. And, but that's where he is. That was his time. And so they turned it down. Okay, and I want you to see the OSHA ladder. I got to tell you about OSHA. And here it is turned down. See where they put these stones down to cushion it when it came over? And remember I told you they channeled all the way in back of it too? And you can see it's all, say, here. Now they're drilling it the other way. We would call this rifting because they're going to break it on the rift, which was this way, turned down. Now it's this way. We're going to rift it. And a big channel, a big obelisk is going to come out of here. And here's the drillers sitting down here, the hand drillers. And they would drill in a 3/4 hole by hand. The hammer weighs 2.5 pounds. And they would put down a hole 4.5 inches thick, anywhere between 6 and 8 minutes. They put a 4.5 inch hole down. And the boss had a stick like I got with a 4.5 inch mark on it. And he would try it every once in a while to make sure they were down to 4.5 inches. Okay. And then they got it loose from way down here, and they started dragging it up. Here it comes, you see, and they've been working on it, taking off a lot of extra stone. And they're starting to drag it up. See all this rigging here? Here's the logs here so to guide it up over the bank. And this is shear pole's leg that we're talking about that's back of Hoxie's right now. This is the engine house. We had to put another engine up because needed more power. So, and this is the gang of people that came around the ridge of the quarry to witness this thing going up. So let's go again. And it went up, and we got it almost over the top. And this weighs here about 70 tons. We had to put another engine out here, special engine here, to take this side. And another engine here. And look at these snatch blocks here, standing right up straight, because it goes up to these blocks to pick it up. Again, you see the chain is all, the stone is protected by wood. It goes up again. Okay. We get it up on top, and they put a chain around the bottom and hook it to a dead man in the hole so it won't slide back in. And then the shear poles would be out over the edge like this, poking it up. And as it came in, and they'd pull the shear poles back a little bit, probably 8 to 10 feet at the most. And then they would, that meant all the guy wires on this side would be slack. When they were pulling that up, they put some extra guy wires in, like this chain, because there was a tremendous pressure, because they were right out straight when they were picking that thing up. But there's up, and these are the handy guys that did that. And this is a company store, the one we're talking about doing away with. But look at the chains wrapped around that thing. Look at how many parts in these blocks. It looks like there's 3 blocks there. There's got at least 5 parts in each one. Okay. Here it is, all boxed, all done, on a car, going to Woodlawn Cemetery, New York, Bronx in New York, weighing 42 tons finished. 42 tons finished. This is the cotton shop. This is the old shed. The hole that this came out of was just on the other side there. There's another one of those handy little jacks, you know. This is before hydraulic jacks. Okay. There it is, all done. What did I say, 57 foot high? Quite a majestic thing. Woodlawn Cemetery has a tremendous amount of work from Westerly. Smith Granite Company we have records of, but there were other things from people in Westerly. Okay. This is another famous one. This is a George Washington equestrian. It's in Pittsburgh. Gertrude and I saw this several years ago. We were out that way. You had to look this photo up. This was cut by Angelo and Columba Severini together. And it was designed by Porsche, who was the sculptor. And over here in back, if you can see this leg, this is this leg on the model. See it? There's the front leg, and there's his head. This is the model put over to one side. But this is the granite stone. See the web that they left here, the carvers have left, the statue cutters, under the tail, under the hoof, and so forth, until it was set in place. And then they would go out and cut those out afterwards because it would be just too delicate to send away. It had spurs, granite spurs. And this was cut in 1892. And Angelo was asked to go out to Pittsburgh and cut these webs out. He wasn't going to go out there. And finally, they finally got him out there. He went out there to do it. And the way it was designed, this is very massive. And when you take all of these webs and things out, all that's supporting it are these fine legs with no muscles. They're not like a normal leg. So this was designed underneath it, this oak collection here. And that's just a mass of stone to support this whole thing. And the committee came to view this, and they saw the spurs, and Angelo Zabrini said, give him 2 more days, he'd make it so the spurs could turn. But the committee didn't think that was necessary. And so it was shipped out there. Now, and I love to see his tools laying on the bottom here, so forth. This is in that same building that we saw before, where the statue cutters all worked. Okay, here it is all done. The spurs are gone. They were so delicate. But notice the hoof, the tail. This is all off, but we still have the oak underneath it. This is the way he looks today. He's, I was delighted to find him so good. Don't forget, this is granite. This is granite. This rain is granite. This is granite. The ears, the detail, the figure itself. It's just marvelous. It's a masterpiece. My father says that this is probably the most intricate piece of work ever done in Westerly, of this type. Did I see a hand back there?
Is that all one piece of granite?
I beg your pardon?
Is that all one piece of granite?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
One piece of granite from here, all up there. It can't be anything else, because it has to, and this is the only all-granite George Washington equestrian in the world. So it's quite famous. Quite a while. I think it was over 6 months. Well over 6 months. Well over 6 months. 10,000. 10,000. Well, is there another picture of this? No. Go back to that again, please. There's a big, there's more to it. This is a statue what I'm interested tonight in. But underneath is a big die and the plinth, several bases underneath it. And it was put up by a labor organization in the Pittsburgh area, which was saying quite a bit. Yeah, this is about $10,000 in 1892. How much today, Donald? Million? That's quite a bit. Okay. I show you this. This is the National Monument at Gettysburg. Most of you have seen these. The figures are out of marble that were cut in Italy, but the main granite things were cut by Batterson Granite up on Leadwood Avenue. And so it's a beautiful thing. These figures are going very fast from erosion because of the elements, but the granite stands there beautiful today. Worth going to look at, tremendous size and beautiful detail. These are marvelous statues, but the material is not conducive to our elements today. So they had, so that's quite a while. Okay. This is a monument that's made out of red Westerly granite, cut by the Smith Granite Company again. This is, commemorates the Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And Donald and I were out there a year or so ago, and we ran into a big celebration about this particular subject, and we enjoyed the whole day to hear the ceremony and speeches and so forth. What was the historian Foote? What was his first name? I can't remember. You probably what? Yes. He was the speaker, and it was grand to be there and hear him right in front of you. So it was very interesting. Okay, let's go. What's next? Another famous one. This is the famous Antietam soldier. I'm showing it to you where he is and not in the shop. This is me way down here before I put on a few pounds. But I just show you the massive stone in the base and the die, the cap. And here he is. He is 26 and a half feet from here to here. He's jointed here. A lot of times you'll read and account one piece, not one piece, two pieces. We know, not only do we suspect it from knowledge of the business, but also historically they dropped the last half, the top half overboard in Washington when they were transferring it from a schooner to a barge to come up the river. And it delayed the dedication 1 year. So that is a real story out there. They call him Old Simon out there when you go out to talk to him about it. But this came up this was all cut up on Ledyard Avenue, and there are pictures of Paulette with a ladder up in front of him, working on him. Paulette was 26 years old, and Joe Bedford, who worked on it with him, was 29 years old. So they were young men when they cut this. But he's a big boy. And let's imagine the design of the foundation under this thing. This thing weighs somewhere in the neighborhood of 130 tons. So that's quite a monument. Okay. This one you must go see, and you've probably seen it. This is the one in New London. What's different about it, it's a built-up shaft with redstone and blue, redstone and blue, altered and built it up. This had statues all around it. Columbus Zabrini is involved here, Diraki's involved here, and Paulette is involved here. It had balls. See, there's one here, but they've all been stolen. There's none left at all now. This was purchased for the city of New London by John Sebastian Lawrence, who was a great benefactor in New London. And the Lawrence Memorial Hospital is another one. And my grandfather was the one who sold it to him, and it was designed at the Smith Granite Company and cut there. Okay? Again, now we're going to get the people. Again, I show you the stone underneath here with the lever down, and the wheel's not so high. And this is the ox driver. And this is look at the googly eyes he's giving me. And these are the oxen that pulled it. And okay. And there's another ox cart. Now this is, if you're going in a shopping center today up at Granite Street, and you drive in, this is where you would drive in, right here. This is where Joe's television shop is right here. Just around the corner is where the radio shop is. And up in here is where you get up into the carpenter tool place. What's that? And here's some of the old sheds here. And the old shopping center is all around this place. So it's changed quite a bit from the old days. Okay? And here's another fellow with a pair of oxen. And the oxen were named by the driver's name. It was Shay's yoke. It was the Shay yoke. It was the Kelly yoke. It was the Brown yoke. It was all by the name of the drivers that were driving it. And they all were weighed. And they were weighed occasionally because the weight had a lot to do with the loads that they could take. So they were kept by him. So here's just a grout, not too much of a load here. But here's a snatch block here. See the cable coming in and going up to the shear pole? Okay. This picture I put in here is not too old to me. I came by it and it was brought to my attention that a lot of the clothes were familiar to European cut. And so this indicates the immigration of the people that came to work here. And they never wore good clothes. Clothes were torn to pieces in the quarry. The granite would wear them out very fast. Stonecutters always wore an apron, and just to protect your clothes. But they would wear out very, very fast. Okay. And here's those drillers that we saw up on top of that obelisk. I just think they look very much, doesn't that look like Mike Fink there? Wouldn't you give? And here's their hammers. Down the drills are stuck in the holes. Here's the size of the hammers. And you can see the half of the channel that they're cutting back. Okay. And here's a picture I think a great deal. This is Charles Ledward that we've been talking about, David. And this is him right here. He was the superintendent. And here was an older gentleman here, worked in the quarry. They've just deep-holed this piece of stone. Now they deep-hole it it's expensive, but it also is very sure that you're going to get a break and you're not going to lose this very important piece. And this is a middle-aged man, and a boy. And look at the hammer hanging on the ladder here. See the piece of wood here between the ledge and the wood to drop it down on, so they can get the chain on it. But I think this is a good people kind of thing, from the youngest to the elderly. They were all there. Okay. This is one that I like very much. This is going to go up to the saw shed. And this is Mr. Gingarelli. This is Banji's father, and young Angelo's father. And this is where they carried their wedges in a tool. It's an old powder case. This is what the blasting powder comes in, but they wouldn't leave it out like that. It had blasting powder. This is a box of ledgers. But again, I could show you the natural beds laying in the quarry. Okay. This is another picture, a little earlier. This was about in the 20s. I think that this is Jimmy Cerenza right here. This is Santo Sposado right here, and I don't know these two. But this is over in the East Quarry. Again, they got a pretty good chain, a lot of dunnage around. Okay. This is Rick Jacobson. Rick Jacobson was an engineer who operated the derrick. These are the levers that would throw the clutches in to run the various drums, to wind the cables up or to let them out. And it was just wonderful to watch these fellas reach in and pull those levers back, and the derrick would be going, and and the engine's going all the time. And you just throw the clutches in to pick up the load. And of course, when you had a real big heavy load, you had to go in and tighten up those clutches so that you get a good friction there and don't waste any bending. And the kids were always knocking the windows out. And this was some kind of a load he was keeping track of up here. See, crossing them off as he goes. But he was a great man. He kept a lot of things going. Okay. And this is a picture of this man. You can't see him, but he is, I know it's Andrew Lowe. It's General Lowe's father. We know young Andrew. And he's cutting a niche in this stone. There'll be a statue go in this eventually. This is in Smith Granite Company. And so he's working on this. I'm just showing how he uses his hands. And everybody has a broom. You're not allowed to blow the dust off your stone when working hours. You brushed it off to clean your stone. Before you went and called the boss over to, when you finished the stone, you swept the stone off, took all your tools off the stone so the stone was completely bare. And then he was able to measure it and look at your work before he'd accept it. But never do you blow it. The only time you blew the dust off was when you went home. Everybody blew the dust off their clothes, and there was a big cloud of dust in the shed, and everybody went home. That was okay. But never do you blow dust in the shed. And another thing I mentioned, one stone cutter would never look at another stone cutter's work, stone. You wouldn't come over, well, how are you doing on your stone? Oh, no, you didn't do that. If you were invited to come over for some advice or something like that, fine. And sometimes you needed some help to hold a straight edge or to hit the bull set or some kind of thing where it needed 2 men. That's different. But you never went over, and even at lunchtime, you didn't go up and down the line and see how everybody was doing. No. That was never allowed. The only man that looked at it was the foreman. That was it. Okay. This is another picture a man you can't see, but this is really Patsy Capizano. And he is shape carving with sand. He has, what he has done, he's now putting back pieces of rubber stencil. This is all rubber stencil here, so when you shoot the sand or the aluminum oxide as we did then, it would bounce off of the rubber, but it would cut into the stone that was exposed, like here. See, that would be a hole. But what he's done before, he took all these off and he shaped the flower. In this case, it looks like a wild rose. And he shaped the petals and all. And then he would paste these back in again and take out these areas and blow the back down. So all his carving then would stand out. So he is one of the men that really developed this technique and in Westerly and then eventually, and of course all over. But in this particular area, my father and Patsy were very much the developers of this technique. One of the things there were two things that Joe Kaduri always said, that two things were going to kill the industry in Westerly. It was sandblasting and the gang saw. And I guess my father said, I guess he was right. Okay. How are we doing on time? Getting late. Gee, we got to go. This is the first Labor Day. A lot of oxen, company store. This was the first Labor Day in what, 96, 94, something like that. Again, they had all the oxen out, and all the ox drivers had their good clothes on. This was a model. These were models. The Zebberinis were in here. Okay, this is a Voslot. Again, this is a model of the 128 volunteers, or New York. It's in Gettysburg. That's a great, nice thing. Here's a gang saw where we cut the big saw blocks and we put it in, and these are the blades that saw down through these blocks, and we get 6 inches an hour. We were really doing good. And this is right involved. It takes a shot, goes down here and is brought up. It comes through this drum and drops down on the stone, on the blades, and it's water and shot where a groove down through this block and makes slabs. This is a big arm that moves that arbor back and forth, hooked to a big crank out here. Big machinery. Okay. This is a man working on his lathe. His name is Alex Shanks. He's a lathe man. He comes from Scotland. I could hardly understand him. But this was a very dusty job, and this was the first operation they installed dust collectors on. And this is a tool that's made in here. We could talk about this all night, this technique. But this would turn the lathe, and this would turn, the stone would turn against this rotating disc, and it would cut the stone off. And it was very violent. Okay. This is cutting a paper roll. This is a big lathe. This was made in Scotland. All the lathes were made in Scotland. And he's crowding along here with automatic feed, and he's cutting this round. You can see he's been hitting the high spots here. And this will be a paper roll, okay? And here it is all done, all around, 22 feet long. It had a countersunk hole in here of about 18 inches, and it had a 10-inch hole bored all the way through. And they used to bore it vertical in a ditch, and they bore it through, and then they would take it out and turn it over and bore it down the other way and hope you'd hit in the middle. And so we're very careful about that. This is Billy Loma and Louis Giono, and they're putting paper on it and preparing it to be shipped out. Okay? This is Tom Lynch, who's a polisher. In those days, they used to actually build a little fence around it with plaster Paris, a big deal. Today, we don't do that. We have a hopper, and we do our own polishing. Okay? This is down the Riverbend Cemetery, way, way down, as far as you can go. This is the brown. I just shown you the Hope, the Statue of Hope. This was cut before any records that I have. And so this was cut before 1882. But it's a beautiful thing. Well done. Okay? This is another one. I've just shown you how frequent they did this time. But this has got garlands on the anchor. So this costs a little more. And here, look at this fancy carving. This is round. So when you did this on the lathe, this had to be full out to this dimension. And all this had to be cut away. So there was a band around here to accommodate the rise of that carving. All that had to be cut away by hand afterwards. And these were campus leaf on the corner. And this was carved by Joseph Pozzetti, Chief Pozzetti's father. And this is in Rochester, New York, by the way. Okay? This is in Providence, Rhode Island. The Swan Point Cemetery. His name is Byron Smith. Interesting, again, we have the statue, but not so expensive. We only have a rope on the anchor, not a garland. Now we have a polished base. And this polished base, if you see this, is made out of Anguilla granite. Anguilla from the quarry on the Anguilla Brook in Stonington. And that was very desirable because of the color. It's polished up very nicely. So that's why this is an important one, because of the Anguilla portion of it. Okay? This is the Pomeroy. This is the first statue cut in this way. This is one piece. Statue across, all one piece. From here up. Notice how this is cut in back here. This is laying right on the stone. And there's a flower here and a flower here. This is the Pomeroy. This is up near Norwich, New York. And it was the first one, and I think this was cut by Columbus Zeberini. First one. Okay, the next one. This is the last one cut, and it was cut by his brother Angelo Zeberini when he was dying, actually dying. And Maycomber writes a great deal about that. Again, it's beautiful. I want you to go see it. This is the Loveland Langworthy angel, we call it. Notice this cut through and back here. This beautiful cross. The beautiful lady. Okay. This is the Greenman statue at River Bend. I'm going to show you this one and another one. This is, and she's quite nice. She's got a little off-the-shoulder sexy thing here, you see. And beautiful drapes. Beautiful lady. And her hands and so forth. Then we went up, and then there was another one ordered, similar, that went to Hope Valley next. And this is for the Nichols family, a little more sedate, you see. We still have the figure, but not so sexy up here, and lower this, but the same drapes, the same figure. But for some reason, they changed the figure somewhat. And I don't know if it was a preference in design, but I'm sure they used the same model, and they had to do it. It's very, very close. But this is what these people were capable of doing. This is not too hard, too far away to see. Okay. And then we get to our famous water tower that we're talking about. This is the area that they're talking about changing over some. This is only a rumor to me. I had a telephone call today to talk about it, let me know about it today, to supply water to the community. And this is the Hill Church and so forth. And this was built on where I said where the road was, and that's how it ended up in front of the Gourley house. But you can see this is under construction. As you will note, it's all riveted. There's not a welding obvious. Maybe there's some repairs we don't know about, but originally it was all riveted. Okay. And there it is up close. And there's the house. And these are these stones that we were able to identify by putting the two photographs side by side, so we know that was it. Okay. So Quarry Hill is changing. This is where we saw those men that were quarrying way up in here, but you see how much has been dug away over the years. And this is a coal chute that goes down to the steam pump and so forth. And, okay. And now we're going to see how Quarry Hill's changed a little bit. This is, we recognize as the driveway into the credit union on Granite Street. And this is the wall that's still out front. It went all the way around. And that was built by Daddy Holliday, the immigrant ancestor of the Holliday family, Bill Holliday, the restaurant and so forth. And there was the father and mother. He was called Daddy Holliday, and his wife was called Mammy. So it was Daddy and Mammy Holliday. They lived on Quarry Hill. They built the foundation of the old Immaculate Conception Church, which is now the center of the chorus building. Okay? And this is where, in that very point, is where the farmer's cottage was. This is Mr. Otter's cottage. And that same stone wall, okay? Now we know where this is. In fact, they've even torn some of this down since we took this picture. The roof is gone, chimney's gone, this thing is gone, or I think they walled this up. But all that's left is this right now. This was the Smith Granite Company off 28. They tore down the shed. This is Hoxie and there's the stone. So, okay, that's what that looked like. Now, what did it look like? Way back, there's the building, which was the studio. This was the engineering building with the drafting and engineers' designs. This was the turning and polishing. This was the modern stone shed. This was the store. This is our water tower. There's those houses over here now and so forth, okay? Looking the other way is that the old Maxim machine shop, and looking down Granite Street to the south, and this is Hoxie's arrangement here. This, okay, what does that look like? What's that?
You know that there's a nice stone, granite stone building just outside of where that is. I wonder what that granite stone building might have been.
That was the company store,
That was a
the
store.
Smith Granite Company store. Very, very much, very important building in its day. Here's Granite Street looking south. As you can see, it was rather dirt road, lady walking down the middle, and the stone sheds. Okay? And now you've probably sat in your car waiting for the light to turn here as we look at the athletic field at the high school, Granite Street down here, and high school up this way. So this is what it looked like then. And this is where the athletic field is. And this was the Vos house. This is where a lot of the early people came. The Kaduris, the first Kaduris came here and lived in part of this complex somewhere. There were others, a Comey, another great carver, and Granite man lived here, okay? That's the end. Well. I'm never able to keep this short. I try hard to keep it for down an hour and we can't do it. Do I have any questions? Any questions anybody would like to ask? Yes. There's no company store today, just a building. Hoxie owns it. And when was it? That was the Smith Granite Company. Ran it, and I guess it was a store up until about the turn of the century. After that, it was rented out to different people for different functions. I think just for storage. It used to be a gas station and a garage and so forth. Yes, sir?
Were there any limitations that the railroad set on you for weight or length in which you...
Oh, yeah.
Because when you started that box, which was overtaken by the car,
Yeah.
how did they form?
Well, I'm sure that was okay. But I'll tell you something that weren't. They had a big base. It was big made red. It was octagonal in plan. And it was probably about 3 foot thick. And it was probably in the outside diameter, somewhat in the neighborhood of 18 feet. So they certainly couldn't go through the railroad this way. So they had to turn it this way. And they built a big framework to support it. And it went out this way. And it went out on one of those transformer cars so that the height didn't become a problem. And they built this thing down in Kaduri's. And they took the big granite piece down on a big truck. And Kaduri's crane loaded it onto the freight car. And I was involved in that as a young boy in school, high school. Yeah. Yes?
I have two things to add that are kind of far-fetched, I mean, but anyhow, in my class at school, there was a Jane Collette, and her father was a commercial artist, and they had a very nice house in Colorado. And then there was a David Cook in my class also, and he was
towns that we had in this town. Any other questions? Well, thanks for listening. And,